Okay, welcome back everybody. So just before I hand over to start today's session, I just want to give you a quick intro into what we're going to cover today. So obviously I've done the welcome. I'm going to hand over to Joe shortly to do the scene setting. Andy's going to cover moving to digital. And then as we've already covered, we're going to cover question and answers at the end. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. I hope you get a lot out of it. And as I say, please log all your questions and we'll try our very best at the end to go through them and answer them. Also, just have a little bit of a think as well about this is going to be the first in a series of these webinars. So please have a little bit of a think about topics that off the back of this that you might want us to cover. And that way we can make sure that we're delivering the content that's most relevant. Okay, enjoy the session. Joe, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Emma. Good morning, everyone. Great to see so many of you have joined us today. Hope you're all sitting comfortably in your virtual chairs. As Emma said, I'm Director of Astraline and Innovation here. I'm part of the exec team at Johnny Johnson, so main accountabilities around running the company's business along with my exec colleagues, but I have a specific remit for the growth and service development of Astraline. The work we do in Astraline with our customers and technology-enabled care partners is an enabler for JJ, and we really take a test and learn approach to innovation that we do across the business. I'm on the programme board of the TSA, and it's great to see some of my TSA colleagues in the audience. I would just say, you know, with my TSA hat on, the impact felt from COVID-19 has created greater appetite than ever to really drive up quality and standards and transform the tech industry as we move through on the digital switch. I don't know about all of you, but this last few months has been the most disruptive in my working career as I've been home working since mid-March. It's caused major disruption to alarm receiving centres nationally and presented a host of new challenges. I know it's been difficult for lots of people, but on a personal and a work level, for me, it's been really important to be at home with my family, but it's also been a real opportunity to accelerate our infrastructure development, changes and plans. It's enabled us to meet more easily with our customers, our technology partners, and look at new things within the wider market, and also develop new ways of working, which we probably will return to at a future seminar. One of the many unprecedented effects of COVID-19 is, as we all know, social distancing and shielding. It's led to isolation for many of our customers in their homes and independent living schemes as dining areas, shared spaces, and a range of community assets closed. In this environment, we believe digital and smart home technology, where adoption has been slow over the last few years, has a real opportunity for us to engage with and support our customers and become part of the service offer. As we go through this presentation, I want you to think as an audience, I want to think to yourselves, you know, have you found that this is the moment, or is this the moment for you to kickstart your own innovation and disruption in your workplace? Emma, if you could move to the next slide. Thanks, Emma. So I'm just grabbing my notes. Bear with me 1 second. So, as Emma said, this is a first in a series of webinars. We have a program laid out, but we wanted to design in some scope to develop it organically based on the questions, feedback and interest that we receive from today as our own approach evolves. We'll focus on the problem at hand. How does the telecare industry support registered providers and the local government sector to not only transition, but to reap the benefits of digital between now and 2025? Some of the things we'll touch on our future webinars is the Hubble project, which is a virtual innovation hub that we're setting up and we're delivering online for the National Care Forum and NHSX from September onwards. We'll also share the work JJ and Astraline are doing around the home of the future and how the work we're doing on the home of the present aligns with that. On the 23rd of July, little plug for this, I know Trisha's in the audience and Lisa, we're doing a webinar on the tech strategy for Greater Manchester Housing Partnership, so if you can come along to that. So before I hand over to Andy, I just wanted to say that you'll all have your own questions from what Andy is going to present shortly, but I have one for you. What do you consider are the biggest barriers to switching everything across to digital by 2025? And I'd be really pleased if we could capture some of that in the chat. I'm going to pass over now to Andy and enjoy the rest of the session. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joe. Emma, if you could kindly move to the next slide for me. Okay, as Emma does that, I wanted to spend a little bit of time introducing myself and the role that I've occupied for the last 2 years in Johnny Johnson Housing. I am, as Joe said, the head of partnership and improvement for Johnny Johnson, working as part of Astraline, and amongst many different strands within my role, digital has formed a big part of it. Looking at what the impact of digital is likely to be on Johnny Johnson, on our wider customer base, and beyond that, as part of our leadership role and the work that we do with the TSA, also looking at how it will impact on the wider industry. And we pride ourselves on being a proactive part of that, an advocate for change. So I want to, first of all, just ask, and again, like Joe, another question for you to consider between now and the end of the presentation, the beginning of the Q&A session. I want you to think about what digital means in the fourth industrial age. So in terms of how digital can affect not only the people that live within our properties, but also the kind of technologies that will go into the properties themselves. Increasingly, when we're working with Johnny Johnson and looking at homes of the future and homes of the present, we're trying to converge smart technologies, smart building, and of course the assistive technology which our tenants will rely on. These diagrams show the kind of progress that's been made in a short period of time. We're in the fourth industrial revolution now, and obviously COVID is having a significant impact on that. So it's important, I think, that we embrace the possibilities that digital technology will bring, and not just consider it as a series of challenges to overcome, but also an opportunity to explore new functionality. I've touched very briefly on the work that we're doing with JJ, our parent company, so around schemes of the future, and also how they impact on retrofitting the properties that we already have within our estate, and making sure that they are fit for the future. That is the amalgamation of smart buildings, smart homes, and smart tech. I'd like to reference that technology is easier to engage with and mesh with everybody. It can form part of everyday life. It doesn't have to be a bolt-on that people very clearly see and articulate as a telecare product. Increasingly, these digital devices are also ways of engaging with the outside world in terms of shopping and streaming, gaming, whatever it is that people do for leisure. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. One of the things that we did, and we continue to do as part of our ongoing journey to explore digital, is look at not simply replacing what we've already got with a digital equivalent, but looking at broadening the range of products that we make available to our customers. So what we're used to seeing is a digital version of a button and box, so a device that works in the home. Yes, there are improved functionalities that go with that, and there are improvements that digital will bring over analog. But very much about replacing the existing with a digital. We also have digital mobiles, which people are regularly using so that telecare services can be accessed outside. So whether that's with GPS, fall detection, etc. But again, the digital equivalent of what we already have in an analog world. But moving on to other technologies which aren't perhaps quite so well established in an analog environment, we're doing more to investigate the benefits of digital wearables. Those are at the moment predominantly watches, and those are an opportunity for us to embrace mobile digital technology, but also start moving towards mirroring well-being activity like the Fitbit, and starting to make headway into a telehealth environment. Moving that on even further, we have passive sensor technology, which we're working with. We have a number of partners who do installations within the home that require no engagement from the tenant. There are no buttons to press. There's no devices to remember to wear, nothing to pull. These sensors will collect movement data and activity data from around the home. They will create a baseline of activity for that person. And then any exceptions to that normal lifestyle activity can then be actioned upon, that we can determine if somebody's normal lifestyle is changing even slightly, and we can make decisions on what we want to do to establish the reasons for that. And that might be additional technology. It might simply be increased social engagement. But of course, we also have a number of other types of device that we support that we think are much more appropriate in COVID. So video care technology is one of the main ones. So increases our ability to engage face to face, so to speak, with tenants, and also removes some of the concerns with face to face interaction in a COVID environment. So those are a number of the kinds of digital devices which we're already involved with, and which we feel will expand the range and the benefits of a digital environment to our customers. Emma, if I can get you to move on to the next slide for me. Okay, while that moves on, the next slide will show a little bit of the analog nation. So as everybody has heard a number of times, the D-Day for digital conversion, all IP, is 2025. However, I think it's important to recognise that the work moves apace in the meantime. Information that the CSA have shared with us recently indicates that about 20% of the network will be converted by this time next year. And with that pace of change, I think it's important that people start to create solid plans for the end of the analog network and for the digital strategy now. And obviously those plans should be coming to fruition towards the end of 2022 and 2023 in order to ensure that that service remains reliable and safe, and to give yourself enough flexibility to fully explore the opportunities. So we know that there are 1.7 million telecare users currently in the UK, and there are a number of communication providers, the main ones, BT, Virgin, Sky, etc., have been very vocal about the potential risks involved and the potential impact of the analog to digital change. Without going into lots of detail, DTMF tones, which are the way that information is transmitted at the moment over an analog network, will begin experiencing clipping, so where some of those tones don't get transmitted correctly. And also the router setup won't be compliant with the digital network, and we will have to replace or supplement our routers with some form of adapters as part of the digital switch. The detail of that is still to come from BT, but that's what they're working on at the moment. But what I'd encourage you to do is think about who your communication provider is. Unless you have an agreement directly with the main guys, the BTs, the Virgins, the Skies, the TalkTalks, you probably use some form of reseller. There are 640 communication providers in the UK, and most of them haven't been particularly engaged thus far and haven't been particularly vocal on behalf of their customer base about what the impact will be. So again, unless you are in the fortunate position to be engaging with the main players in the industry, I would encourage you to speak to your communication providers as soon as you can, or reach out to somebody like Astraline or whoever your alarm receiving centre is, to be an advocate on your behalf with your communication provider. Start having those conversations now. As I said, the speed of transition is such that we need to be moving forward with a solid base from which to progress now. There are a number of myths around the analog to digital switch, and one of them I think it's important to address now. There's work going on within which the TSA are heading up about testing analog technology. There is a myth that no analog technology will work in a digital environment, and that simply isn't the case. We don't know yet which analog devices will work, and Astraline, the TSA, and a number of other leaders in the industry are doing work to engage with people like BT to do that testing on your behalf. But there is every possibility that some of that technology will continue to work. So it's important that you are armed with a list of what works in a digital environment, what doesn't, and then you can factor that into your plans, because you'll probably have a phased approach to the way that you transition to the digital environment. You won't do it all in one go. And you'll want to work with your alarm receiving centres and your communication providers on that phased change. So again, when we have more solid ideas about what analog technology will be reliable in a digital environment, and we're going to be re-engaging post-COVID with BT at the end of August to move that project along, then Astraline will certainly share that information either through webinars like this or other forms of engagement with anybody who's interested. And of course, the TSA will do likewise. Emma, if you could move on to the next slide, please. So while that changes, the next slide is looking at a little bit of detail on the analog to digital shift, really to make sure that everybody has a similar and consistent understanding about why it matters. Yes, the change is being forced upon us. So one way or another, everybody is going to have to adapt to a new digital communications network. So that is a challenge that will universally face us all and we'll all have to overcome. However, I think it's important to recognise some of the drawbacks of analog so that we can recognise some of the benefits of digital and really look at the positives about that transition. So analog environments have routinely poor connection speeds. You know, your end users, your tenants will often press a button and then nothing will happen for upwards of a minute. The majority of that time is simply getting the alert, the button press, through the analog network to the alarm receiving centre. It's not the alarm receiving centre itself not answering the call. Those low connection speeds are a result of analog and DTMF. Most scheme technology relies on a single outbound BT line. So if you have 60 people in a scheme and 2 of them press the button at the same time, only 1 of them can talk to the alarm receiving centre at a time. And that causes confusion and is a drawback of the technology. Increasingly, parts will be difficult to get hold of. Equipment will become increasingly obsolete and unreliable in an analog network, never mind when we fully transition to all IP. And, you know, with the greatest respect to the main suppliers in the industry, I think the look and feel of the technology is largely the same as it was 15, 20 years ago. It hasn't advanced significantly. Certainly not, it hasn't kept pace with changes to other devices that we routinely use, whether those are tablets or TVs, though, you know, the aesthetic remains rooted in, 20 years ago. Obviously, I've touched a little bit on tone-based protocols and how unreliable they are, and the increasing levels of unreliability as the change to digital takes place. And we've talked, of course, about 2025 as the D-Day for all IP. But again, I hope I've impressed upon everybody that action needs to be taken now, and plans should be being created over the next 12 to 24 months at the outside, with implementation by the end of 2023. That is the best advice I can give people about timescales for change. In terms of the benefits of digital, they encourage open standards. So again, in the past, some suppliers haven't been particularly keen to share their protocols and their technology. Interoperability has been a watchword for the TSA. for a long time, and digital will ensure that that's the case. It'll no longer be possible to work with closed protocols, or at least not to the same extent. The flow of data will be much freer in a digital world. So the technology will create data. That data will be freely accessible in an anonymized fashion to the equipment supplier so that they can improve their roadmap for development of their products and services. It'll be available to the alarm receiving center to provide actionable insights to you, the customer, about how the device is being used. And that data will increasingly form part of the overall roadmap for how we get to digital and embrace the possibilities of digital. Importantly, it also, as I've touched on, increases the range of functionality that exists within a digital world. I've touched on 6 or 7 different types of digital device, most of which you'll only be passingly familiar with. And increasingly, and again, especially with COVID, there is an increased emphasis on those that promote well-being, those that improve social isolation, those that look at administration of telehealth and preventative telecare services, and maybe even in the short term telemedicine. I think it's probably worth mentioning at this point, again, the convergence technology. So an increasing focus on converging types of digital functionality. The market is responding to that on its own, but I like to think that that's because of feedback from organizations like us. And increasingly, we will find that the technology allows people to do more with single devices. Just a moment, everybody. I'm getting some feedback that my camera might be causing some connection issues with the presentation. And as pretty as I am, I think I'll deprive you all of my image. So just bear with me. Hopefully, everybody can still see me, can still hear me, sorry, and still see the presentation. The last thing I wanted to talk about on benefits of digital presence. So, by which I don't mean gifts. I mean the digital technology constantly connects to both the supplier and the alarm receiving center. And never before we're in a position to ensure that we know when a device is no longer communicating, and we're able, before the end user and before their clients, their tenant, we're able to highlight that there's been a dropout in connectivity, that service is no longer viable, and for somebody to take action, usually contacting a mobile service, an internet service provider or similar. So that assurance exists far more in a digital world than it ever has before. And that will promote choice as well, I think. It will allow different methods of communication in digital, and it will give people a lot more scope to move around providers. Emma, if you can move on to the next slide for me. Okay, so in terms of understanding your current position, as we're part of Johnny Johnson Housing, we felt it was important to understand our current position. And when we cultivate a digital offer, it's predominantly with Johnny Johnson in mind. So it was important that we understood who our tenants were, how we engaged with the tenants, how we dispelled any concerns they might have about the change and what it would mean to them, and the service that they rely on and are supported by. So this slide covers some of the key information which we've captured over the last 18 months. But in terms of cultivating and refining that offer and working, of course, with our Astraline customers, we recognise the importance of asking key questions before we talk about specifics. Again, the industry has perhaps in the past been guilty of simply forcing a provision on somebody because of lack of choice, and that's no longer the case. So we will always conduct some diagnostics to make sure that we have a full understanding of an individual customer's needs. So for Johnny Johnson, that would be understanding the physical makeup of the site. So property type, are we talking about, somebody in their own home, all the way to, 50, 60, 70 people in an independent or group living scheme? What's the demographic of the people who rely on the service at each of those locations? How many people are there? Is there any on-site coverage? Because the industry has been moving away from permanent scheme managers for a number of years now. So we need to know when on-site staff exist and when they don't. We need to understand levels of vulnerability, both overall within a resident population, but also if there are any specific needs, whether that's chronic medical conditions, whether they're common to high proportions of the population, or whether it's catered around delivering services for a specific need, so somebody living with dementia. Those are all critical factors in determining what digital means for somebody at a particular site and how to get the most out of that provision. We also need to understand the levels of independence of the resident population. The idea that you create an all singing and all dancing solution for somebody at a site, but then it fails because 50% of the people who live there want protection when they go or to the cinema or shopping or whatever it might be. That's a failure of the industry to fully understand the services that are needed by the population. So it's important that we understand levels of independence across a particular scheme or particular properties. Again, touched on COVID and the impact on social isolation, well-being. These are all increasing considerations in a COVID world and are something that we should be asking about and actively measuring. So video care, for example, may be a way that we can support on-site staff and help to engage people in their homes with their friends and family, larger care networks, and of course an alarm receiving centre. And that video care technology, I think, will become increasingly popular as the full impact of COVID is realised. And then finally, the access to a local care network. So one of the key pieces of information that we capture in an analogue world is, do we have people local to our residents who can help out in the event that they've had a not so serious incident? Do those care networks exist everywhere? Are they always friends and family, or are they care professionals? When should we be looking at first responders or the emergency services? Those are all relevant questions, not only to the service users themselves and to their friends and family, but they will influence the kind of technology that should be in place. There are other considerations. So what the best method of connectivity is. Most people will know that technology exists to work on either broadband, whether that's a Wi-Fi or a physical connection through an Ethernet cable into a property, or technology that uses the mobile communications network, GSM. And both methods of connection are valid and may or may not be appropriate in a particular location or for particular equipment to deliver a desired outcome. It's important for us to understand what's already there. As I've touched on, it's a myth to suggest that no analog technology will work in a digital world. And by understanding what already exists, we may be able to recommend that with a simple software upgrade, the technology doesn't need replacing. And that allows people to focus their capital investment where it will do the most good. We also need to understand, where we're talking to people who aren't currently our customers, Astraline customers, we need to understand how engaged they are with their current alarm receiving centre. Have they got a firm idea about what the alarm receiving centre's digital plans are? How well progressed are they? Have they got a programme for seeking out the best digital technology coming onto the market? And have they talked, in any practical sense, about their own plan and what their budget might be to implement that plan? Those are all important questions whenever we're speaking to somebody and supporting them. Emma, sorry, if I can get you to move on to the next slide for me. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the TSA and the leadership role that they play for our industry and the work that we're doing with the TSA. So we're proud to be part of the Analog to Digital Special Interest Group. And we are going to be re-engaging with BT probably the tail end of next month or the beginning of September, really to advance that agenda about giving you the best advice we can on what the impact of analog to digital will be, and for you to make informed choices about the technology that's already in place. I think it's important, if you do nothing else as a result of this or similar webinars, I think it's important for you to advance the agenda that you have on digital and talk to your alarm receiving centre, talk to the TSA, seek out advice from anybody who'll talk to you, whose opinion you respect, to really get a firmer understanding about what it means for you and start to put together those plans. It can be daunting, but once you've started with guidance, you'll be able to start to pull together the specifics. So 24 months to get this plan in place, don't wait. Important that you speak to your technology providers. It's important that you explore new technology providers that are moving into the market. A great deal on that, and we'll be happy to make introductions and talk to you about the technology. It's important that you understand what it does for you in a digital world, so you can make informed choices. I would be more than happy to look at completing a full assessment at some point with anybody who wants one. But again, most important is to reach out and speak to somebody within the industry. And again, your alarm receiving centre is a font of knowledge. They, even if they're not digital now, they will be, and they will have been doing work in the background to understand how best to make that change. I think that what's important to us is that people have a fundamental understanding of the basic impact. So at the moment, as I've touched on, there's work being done at local exchange level to make them all IP, and that's working at pace. Your system at the moment, your device is powered by the telecoms network. That's where it derives its power. That will no longer be the case in digital. So there will be a need for alternative power supplies or battery backups. We also know that current router configurations won't work. So again, there will be information coming out from people like BT about terminal adapters that will allow analog devices to work in a digital network. So again, if all you're doing is reaching out to get some advice on what that means and what that will look like, then that's a good place to start. We have cultivated a digital offer, and again, to be clear, that's very firmly about what JJ needs and what we feel the Astraline customer base needs. These webinars will allow us to be more responsive to a wider audience's needs. So, please do let us know which webinars to focus areas on and what you feel you don't know enough about to make an informed choice and to put that digital plan in place. So we see the digital journey as being a three-step process. Initially, it's about engagement and education. So making sure people are working from a common understanding and are consistent in their approach. And for a lot of people, education is the right place to start because they won't necessarily have had good advice yet. They won't have done a lot of engagement, and they need to get a better overall understanding of what's happening. Stage 2 will be about advice and guidance. So having somebody like Astraline help you create your plan, ask the right questions that are specific to your needs and the needs of your tenants, and of course for your developing needs as you build new properties or as you look to retrofit existing ones. And then finally, when you've created your plan, then we'd be proud to be a part of executing and implementing that plan. We are already working with clients who are at that third stage of the process. They've had a plan, they now want to turn that plan into reality. They want assurance that they have a digital solution in place well in advance of 2023, never mind 2025. So, Emma, next slide, please. I think the important thing to recognise, you're not alone in this. There are a lot of different people who you can reach out to. There is the TSA, there's your alarm receiving centre, there is your alarm receiving centre software partners. We use the UMO platform, and Innovation, who are the suppliers of that platform, are endlessly helpful in helping us create the digital offer, get a fundamental understanding of what digital means to us and our customers, and that helps us advance our agenda in support of JJ and Astraline's customer base. You can reach out to digital suppliers. We'd be happy to provide you with a list of those that we work with. And of course, the communication providers, the people that provide you with your telecoms network. And then finally, we're working with a number of consultants, either within housing or within domiciliary care, and other associated industries, to help them understand what digital means and how it can support their own aspirations for care in a housing setting. So any and all of those types of organisation can help you create your plan. So again, you're not alone. Don't be afraid to reach out. We think as much as 40% of our industry has done nothing to engage with the wider industry on digital. So, you know, you're not alone if you haven't started, but it is important that you do. I think from my perspective, those are some of the key fundamentals. All I will say over and above that is that a good place to start in your own organisation is to review your existing analogue telecare structure. Document what you've currently got. Johnny Johnson are using a number of suppliers and contractors to do that on our behalf, to do a proper asset log of what technology we've got out there in each of our locations. Write down your fundamental needs. So not only covering the things that you think you need to migrate from your current analog solution, there's a lot of good work that went into creating that. It doesn't all need to be thrown away. A lot of that is still fundamentally useful in a digital world. But also think about, with the digital technology that's available, what new functionality would benefit your tenants and you as a social housing provider. And also identify the potential benefits to the customer experience. So in terms of making the solution useful to your customer and having them engage with it day to day and find it a useful solution that they can live with. Think about what the potential benefits are to them. Johnny Johnson did an exercise at our Spey House scheme to do just that. We got an NHS consultancy to come in and work with about 20 of our residents there to really get a sense of what real world problems they experience and how to improve that customer experience in a digital world. And that was really useful for us. Also look at a holistic approach. So again, I touched on the range of technology that's available, and it's far beyond what's available in analog. It's not just in-home and GPS mobile stuff. So bearing that in mind, think holistically. Think about how all of these devices could interconnect to benefit you as social housing landlords and your tenants. Make sure that you're exploring the art of the possible as well as what you currently have. Obviously, a key concern for a lot of organizations is the financial impact on having to make the transition. So start thinking about budgets and the potential financial impact. We will provide technology either for purchase or for rental. And that might be a way to mitigate some of the upfront costs of migration to digital. Obviously, you can't avoid some expenditure, but it's not all about capital outlay. There are ways to mitigate and manage the budgetary constraints. And again, think about those and work with others on the best possible solution. And then finally, approach this like you would any other project. Think about a risk approach to the exercise. Think about what the main risks are in analog to digital. Think about how likely they are to happen and what the impact of them happening is. And then think about how you can mitigate those. And some of what we've talked about today are themselves mitigations, reaching out to industry experts, getting greater information, better understanding, looking at ways to mitigate financial impact. All of these things, when put into a risk matrix, will give you an element of comfort. They'll help you understand what the risks are and how you can go about mitigating them. And then finally, when your plans are complete, we will certainly be working with Johnny Johnson. We'd love to work with others, our Astraline customers and everybody else, about how to implement those plans. So, you know, once you have created your plan, think about who's going to implement it, who's best placed to work with you to make that plan a reality. We'd love to be that organisation, of course, and we'll be happy to help whether you're a current customer or not. And that probably covers the lion's share of what we wanted to discuss on this first webinar. Hopefully it's given you a flavour, an overview on the journey from analog to digital. There will be people in the room who are well engaged and well advanced in the creation of their plans, and that's why they're on the call or on the webinar. There will be others in the room who really know in their heart of hearts they haven't done enough. And hopefully this will give you an opportunity, somebody to engage with, to say, tell me more, help us create that really vital plan to create a digital solution and a safe service for our tenants. And I think most importantly, we want to do these webinars once a quarter. While we certainly have some ideas about what we want to include, ultimately, we are delivering a service to our customer base, and your thoughts and your needs are what drive these webinars forward. So we would certainly welcome your feedback on what comes next. At that point, I will hand back to Emma to have a look at some of the questions that you raised, and hopefully Joe and I are in a position to answer them. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you, Andy. Really, really informative. I've certainly just learned a lot about the digital switch that I didn't necessarily know before. So thank you for that. I hope everybody, there's quite a few questions coming through on the chat. So thank you. I know you've all been chatting amongst your tables. So we can't necessarily see everything that's in the individual table chat. So if you could add them into the Q&As, we will pick them up from there. So we've got Andy. I'll invite Joe back in as well. And then we'll run through some of these questions, if that's okay, if Joe's able to join us. He is, there he is. Welcome back, Joe.
Thanks,
so
Emma.
I'll just pick up on the first question. Are terminal adapters the same as communication converters?
Wow.
That's not an easy one to start with.
I'm going to defer to Andy on this, I think.
Yeah, to all intents and purposes they are. So it's about how to make analog devices communicate effectively over an analog network. Those should be supplied both for consumer individuals and for businesses by the communication providers themselves. So I know BT have communication devices, call them terminal adapters or whatever, that will do that will allow analog technology to connect to a digital network and work effectively. I know that they're not fully developed yet, and I imagine that there will be branded alternatives from people like Virgin, TalkTalk, etc. There will all be variants on the same, and yes, they are the same thing.
Thank you. Okay, how do we address concerns about products and equipment that may work or may not work?
Joe, do you want to cover this one as well?
Please, Andy.
Sure. So I alluded to some special interest groups which the TSA set up probably 12 months ago to look at a variety of different topics around digital. The first one, group one, is specifically to look holistically at analog to digital and the impact. And one of the big elements is the technology that's already out there. So we've made some. COVID obviously has put a bit of a challenge in our path about engagement with people like BT, etc. And as I said in the presentation, I'm pleased to say that we will be re-engaging shortly. But if we progress on the basis that we left it at, the plan is that we will be testing the current range of products that's available from the likes of TimeTech and Tunstall and Doro, etc., and one level of legacy. So the current range and one level of legacy in the past. That will form the basis on which we test the technology. Anything that's older than one generation ago will not be in scope for testing, and the advice is assume it will not work and should be replaced as a priority. So hopefully that's something very clear that you can talk to your equipment providers about. Get them to send you a list, and a list will be created by the group anyway. We'll get them to send you a list of currently supported equipment and one generation of legacy equipment. Anything not on that list is not in scope for testing and needs to be replaced urgently. That testing process will probably take place across the remainder of the calendar year with the likes of BT, Virgin, Kingston Communications, etc. And through the TSA Special Interest Group, they will advise on the results of that testing. And I would encourage the TSA to be as transparent and clear as possible when articulating those results, So it should be the testing was good, it will work, or the testing was inconclusive, we can't be sure, or the testing showed that this device does not work reliably and should be replaced. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you, Andy. So I'm just going to, so next one, what areas or where should we invest in new equipment?
Joe?
just a little bit, I suppose, from just our experience at Johnny Johnson, kind of more recently. You know, we've got a program. I think, you know, what I would say as well is maybe this isn't the time to fully invest everything, put all your eggs in one basket, because we're still a number of years away from the end of PSTN. We're saying today, you know, that there's an urgency here, but I think what we're seeing is that there's going to be new entrants to the market, or, you know, warden call systems and others are being refined and improved. I think, you know, we're doing work around end of life warden call systems, so we're looking at and trialing and testing different sort of approaches and different ways in which we can handle that, because I think there has been an element of, whether it's by, you know, design or whether it's by fault, I don't know, but it does feel to some degree that fully robust solutions that do everything and cover everything in a way that we'd like to see are perhaps not quite there on the market yet. And I'll just give you an example, something that can connect up to all of your smart home applications in the house, and it's a very open system that allows you to easily integrate other devices, as we see with things like, you know, an Echo or an Alexa smart speaker, the way it can easily integrate with other technologies. So yeah, testing around the edges, but focus on your end of life warden call. And if you want to add anything on to that, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, just to say that Joe's absolutely right, that between now and, let's say, the end of 2022, new products will come onto the market. They will be converged products, so they will do more than one thing. And, you know, there's no need to make decisions on what you spend your money on right now. I think the important thing right now is to start engaging and start creating that plan. And as long as you're working with somebody who's forward thinking, who is horizon scanning for new products as they come onto the market, and has a robust way of identifying what's good and what's not, has a good way of testing that those devices will do what they say they do in a real world setting, looking at some of the supply chain and procurement side of things, making sure that they're good value for money, that they're robust, that they're working ethically, all of which are considerations when you're looking at social housing. It's more important to start that engagement than it is to actually make decisions on what to spend your money on.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Joe. Okay, next question. How can we overcome the challenges we may face bringing new technology into our older properties and schemes?
Joe,
yeah, I mean, I'd just say, you know, again, that's you know, that's something to work with your suppliers, your maintenance contractors, who does your installation. You know, depending on what you're going to install, obviously there some require more cabling and require more infrastructure than others. So I think that's a very sort of detailed, you know, almost case by case, really. What is the existing thing? What is the existing legacy kit that's there, and what would need to be swapped out for the system that you're going to put in, very generally.
Yeah, Joe's absolutely right. And again, hopefully this came across during the webinar. We've in our solution, we've certainly factored those questions in. Those are vital questions. So that's why we ask about what's current equipment, what is the current connectivity, what connectivity will work better for where you are and the construction of your building. Because depending on the answers to those questions, that will identify which direction to try to move in. So, you know, whether you go down the route of cabling and broadband versus mobile GSM, it will point, you know, whomever in a particular direction in terms of what your budget should look like. GSM technology has a lower capital investment, but it costs slightly more to maintain. Technology that requires broadband is more costly up front, but cheaper to maintain. So these are all, they're all known considerations. If you work with the right people, you can rely on them to understand that these are important questions, to know what to ask, what the answers mean to the solution that that will be recommended. Again, it's about collaborating with the right people and know what questions to ask. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Whoever asks that question, these are all factors. And as long as you get the right information from the right questions, you'll be in a great position to move forward with a safe value for money proposition.
Okay, great, thanks. Andy, I'm going to come straight back to you with the next question. Are terminal adapters delaying the inevitable of transferring to fully digital in the future?
If there was no need to do it, then absolutely. So if there was a commitment from, our industry, for example, to swap to digital in its entirety before all IP, then you wouldn't need terminal adapters, certainly not to the same extent. So yes, I think the honest answer is yes, that they are delaying things, but at the same time, it's not practical, especially when it's not essential, to swap out 1.7 million analog devices in the next 3 to 5 years. So it's a difficult one to answer. The answer is yes, it is delaying things.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. Okay, could dispersed alarms be a cost-effective way to replace old hardwired systems? Joe, shall I come to you on that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think it absolutely has its place on the basis that there's a big capital investment for decommissioning your existing ward and call system and then recommissioning a new one. And if you're upgrading that again, you've got obviously the sort of cabling and infrastructural work that you need to do. So there is a cost, but I think one of the big considerations and something that's very key to us here with our Johnny Johnson hat on is around how that links in with key sort of fire systems and other sort of compliance systems that you have. So there's I guess you're looking at a sort of case by case basis in some cases, but I think certainly with dispersed equipment it's easier to swap out, it's easier to install, but you don't perhaps necessarily get that collective solution, and the type of collective solution that we'd like to see. It would enable and does enable better communication within the scheme, but we're looking at a range of that as well. So I don't know if that fully answers the question, but I think again, something for people to explore and think through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Andy, would you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, so without name dropping too much, but we've done a trial to investigate exactly that scenario with an organisation down in Bath. And again, to be clear, they're not customers of ours. They simply needed to engage with an alarm receiving centre that was digitally enabled. And in our leadership role, we wanted to advance their agenda and try to help them understand if the answer to that question. So, that we did trial. The last one was 50 dispersed digital units, specifically to see if it could replace a hardwired system. Now, I'll have to reach out to that organisation to see if they're willing to share their findings. But subject to that, then I'm sure they'd be happy to let you know the outcome of that project. As Joe's alluded to, I think as key questions like that get asked, and that's why engagement is so important, new products from new suppliers come onto the market. So we are looking at a mobile GSM solution that will replace a hardwired solution within schemes. So it gives you a little bit of both worlds. It's a bit of a dispersed solution. It's modular. It can be added to, doesn't require expensive cabling, and works with doors, fire panels, communal call points, etc. So those products are being created, and we're engaging with those suppliers once we've vetted them, so that you can get the best advice in order to answer those questions.
Okay,
great.
Thank you very much. Okay, this is a biggie. What is the risk of not doing anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think I suppose threaded through what we've both been saying through the day. I mean, I suppose one point, Andy's, and I think it's a point that you don't often get or hear made, is that the idea that nothing analog will work in the future is not the case. You know, some analog devices will work, but I guess from a risk perspective, you know, we've got 1.7 million telecare customers nationally. You know, if any proportion of that didn't work, you know, after 2025, then that's, and the likelihood that the majority proportion of that won't work, then you're effectively losing supply, and you're losing the life critical and safety critical service to those users. So kind of massive issue of not getting it done, or not starting to do it.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
I think we've got a few more.
Yeah, we've got
a
couple more questions, so we'll go through them. So, how do I make sure that what we invest in now is future proof?
Andy, do you think we've picked up some of that? Do you want to just clarify on that, Andy?
Can you read the question again for me, Emma?
How do I make sure that what we invest in now is future proof?
Okay, so again, to touch on the previous point, while we're advocating engagement now and planning now, we don't necessarily suggest that you buy now. You can if you want. And I think what's important is that you're working with a supplier who, A, has a good roadmap for the development of their kit. If they tell you that it's all things to all people right now, then they're wrong, because nobody has any idea what future device requirements will be. Nobody knew about COVID 12 months ago. So, you know, let's not be fooled into thinking that what's available right now is what we will ultimately end up using. But as long as you're working with a supplier who is open to collaboration, who has a roadmap, and remember, when these devices get installed, that will be generating a rich flow of data that will help suppliers improve their roadmap. The other thing to remember in a digital world is you don't have to swap out kit anymore. There's no getting contractors onto site and swapping equipment out. More often than not, digital devices can receive firmware upgrades remotely, just over the internet. So it's going to be much easier to preserve the life expectancy of a digital device than it is its analog equivalent. But my advice is don't buy anything yet. Just get your plans in place and then work with a partner who is constantly looking for the best technology that's available. So you can put specifics into your plan right at the end, ready for implementation.
Okay.
Emma, just as an adjunct to that, I suppose just to say, I mean, I think I'm not saying we kind of totally disagree here, Andy, but obviously people need to make investment decisions now. You know, certainly because of equipment and nearing end of life. But the work that we've been doing, and we were disrupted by C19, the work with Virgin and BT around the way in which they've emulated what the future digital networks will look like. We're working with our existing customers, and we're getting back around the table around testing and trialing this equipment and making sure that it will work in the new environment. So that's something that we're looking to be doing and have started to do with our existing customers. So that's a part of providing reassurance and a bit of hand holding really through the switch.
Yeah. One thing just to add before we move on, Emma.
Yeah, no problem.
If an analog device comes to end of life right now, so it fails tomorrow and you need to replace it, a key question for me is this: why, under what circumstances, would you ever consider replacing it with an analog device? So ignoring 10 to 15 year projections about whether something will future proof, if you were having to replace an analog device today, why would you replace it with another analog device? So it's just an open question for people to consider in the room. Under what circumstances would it ever be the right decision to replace a current analog device with another analog device, given what we've discussed today?
Great. I think just a question for me before we move on to the last couple is: do you recommend any products that we have been testing, or what's your approach to recommending particular products?
Well, Joe was very clear that we weren't going to make this a sales pitch. So
yeah.
Well, Andy, I think let me sort of pick up there. So just to give the politicians' answer here, is that is that we have an open system. We integrate stuff that's already on the market. We have new suppliers approaching us, coming to us all the time with their equipment and asking us, can we specifically integrate it into UMO? So I think the approach that we always take really is around looking for best value. We put things through a very rigorous testing process to see if it meets our objectives. And we do part company from time to time with suppliers because their equipment doesn't quite match our standards of what we want to deliver. So I think we just look at what's out in the market and try and look for best value, but that balance of it being a really solid, well tested, robust device with a good kind of price point attached to it. So I think that's the approach we take, Emma.
Great, thank you.
So we probably want to wrap up. Have we got a few more,
yeah,
Emma?
We've got a few more. Let's just rattle through them. So can Astraline take digital calls?
Yes.
Okay, that's a very great answer, great and simple answer. Is there any funding available through the government initiatives to support this switch?
There's COVID funding, isn't there, Joe? You know more about it, but
yeah, doesn't look like a I'm not particularly seeing any RPs that have accessed any of that funding. I think that's a good question. Why don't we take that away? We'll do some follow up, Emma, and we'll try and get that back out, and perhaps our colleagues in the TSA can advise as well there. I don't think so, personally.
Brilliant, thank you. Just before we hit the final question, one probably from me, I've learned a lot today, but what is, this is for Andy. Andy, what is a terminal adapter?
Do you know what? For people who are interested in that level of technical detail, I'm more than happy to do a newsletter or some kind of e-shot or something like that. But it's not a short answer, and it's a fairly technical answer. So
yeah,
maybe
a webinar, maybe a webinar.
Oh God, no! Please not.
Maybe a webinar for a very niche audience.
Okay. Great, thank you. And finally, and I think this is a really important one for the people that we've got in the room, and it's obviously sparking some kind of food for thought. So after this meeting, how can anybody seek support from Astraline on the digital switch and new products?
They can speak to Joe, they can speak to Lisa, they can speak to me, they could send us an email, have a virtual meeting, any of the above.
So what we'll do today, everyone for listening, is you will receive, we have recorded this session, so you will receive that in an email along with a bit of a short survey, just so we can get your feedback on how this has gone and get some thoughts on potential topics for future webinars. So we'll make sure that we include Joe's, Andy's and Lisa's contact details, just in case you've not got them, just to make sure you can then make contact and have some further discussions on how Astraline may support you during this process. I think that's it for questions, and I'm just going to check the chat just to see if there's anything in there, and I don't think there is. So I'm going to hand over. Sorry, Joe.
Sorry, Emma. Just the point from Wendy, I think, is Wendy from the TSA. It's worth if you just pick that up. It's on the general chat. If you can't see that, I can see that.
Yeah, if you could. I can't seem to.
Okay,
oh, sorry.
fine.
Just bear with me. Yeah, no, Joe, I can't see that.
That's fine. Okay, so I think it was the point that I was making, but I think it's a good additional point from Wendy, which is with regard to swapping hardwired with dispersed alarms, although the initial investment may be greater, the life of the dispersed alarm is generally much shorter and therefore has to be replaced. So in the long term may not be the cheaper option. And Wendy's put as I'd mentioned as well, about it doesn't always give the coverage for lifts and fire alarms, etc. And that uninterrupted power supply as well that we see with hardwired. So very much the discussions, from as an independent living provider, Johnny Johnson, and the work we're doing internally, it's very much around that safety and compliance, and it's become so much more important since Grenfell and other discussions over the last couple of years around that. So yeah, it's a point I thought was just well made, Wendy, and worth reiterating.
No, that's great. So that ends the question and answers. Joe, I'm going to hand back over to you to close the session off. But on behalf of me as your host, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed today's session, and thank you for making the time and taking the time out to come along.
Great. So thanks Emma, and thanks Andy, and thanks to Phil as well. You know, I think you've really helped us kind of orchestrate this and work in the background. It is a slightly unusual sort of thing because we can just see your little icons on the tables, so it's sometimes hard to gauge how you found it as an audience. But hopefully through the questions that we've had received and the answers we've been able to give and some of the follow-up, you found it a useful and worthwhile exercise. And as I say, this is the first in a series of webinars. We'll get future quarterly dates out for the other ones that we're doing. But really thank you for your time that you've given us today, and I hope you found it useful, and enjoy the rest of your day. That's me.